Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of No Turning Back. Today, Stan McChrystal and I have a great discussion with our good friend Anne-Marie Slaughter. Anne-Marie is currently the president and CEO of New America, a nonpartisan think tank here in DC. Anne-Marie's had an amazing career from academia to political advisory positions. She's really a cornerstone of the Beltway here in DC. She served as policy advisor in State Department under Hillary Clinton. She was the dean of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton. She's written 8 books and was the author of one of the most downloaded and read articles in the history of the Atlantic magazine, Why Women Still Can't Have It All. Today's conversation is great. We talk about how this current situation is affecting leaders, how she's approached that as a leader of a large organization and personally managing time and her mental focus, and then talk broadly about what are our lessons going to be from this experience. How will we be better as a nation, better in the way we govern ourselves, better in the way we communicate as members of the society, and then what will be the broader effects internationally? How will nations start to coordinate differently as a result of what we're going through right now? So again, thanks for joining us. We hope you enjoy the discussion. Dan McChrystal and myself today in this No Turning Back series. We'll dive right in and would love to get your thoughts on, just as a leader, how has this impacted you, and what are the conversations you're having with leaders out there? Because I'm sure they're coming to you for advice and thoughts.
Well, I think more than anything, it's been a real education in how you lead when you both have a formal leadership position and when you don't. So obviously, on the one hand, I'm the head of New America, and there's been real challenges. Like everyone is now leading in a distributed way and trying to keep up the morale of people who are in very different situations, from people with young kids at home to people who are living alone, lots of differences. But at the same time, I'm part of a couple of groups of people who are stepping up to try to make a difference on a very big problem. And I'm very struck by the sort of impulse to be a leader when you don't have authority. And yet, how do you exercise leadership in that setting? So those two things have really been back to back for me.
So
Can you talk more about?
Can I follow that up?
Yes.
So how do you, because you've done that in the past, you've stepped up in wider issues and you've been a leader, a thought leader and a practical leader. So give us a sense of how to do that.
Well, it's funny, Stan, so much of what I've learned about leadership, I've learned from you, that it's funny to tell you. I mean, because I'll say, you're the one, I quote you all the time, where you say leading is like gardening. And you talk about cultivating relationships. And particularly when you have no authority, your effectiveness is so much a function of trust and confidence in that you have in others and that they have in you. Because you need to get things done, and nobody's going to order other people, or you can try, but you have no formal authority. And so what I've found is that I can find people I know and I trust, and we together can start something rolling. And then often my job as a leader is connecting, because it's horizontal, right? What I can bring to a group is, hey, I know this person and I know that person. I've worked across many fields in my life, so I can do academia and technology and think tanks and women, all sorts of things. But it's the stuff of leadership is so much the stuff of strong relationships and knowing how to navigate working together and deconflicting when, again, no one has any formal authority.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Can you dive a little deeper on that? I mean, because you brought up obviously some of your areas of focus. I would love to explore 2 things. One, how networks are going to be so critical as we move through this, and then what changes in the workplace. Maybe we can spend some time on both of those areas. First off, the networks of collaboration. I mean, You've been studying networks deeply for many years. How are you seeing that evolve, and how much? What are the lessons you think we're starting to frame up out of this? The importance of, boundaryless networks to solve problems like this.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I do think one of the people who are probably having the hardest time in this unstructured stepping up world are people who are used to hierarchies, who are used to being able to say, get this done this way by this date, because of course we can still do that in our specific organizations, but if we look at the COVID crisis and the economic crisis, and as a country, or even as a state or as a municipality, what we're seeing is the need to connect many, many different parts and to respond very quickly. And again, you all have written about how you work with teams and how you work more horizontally. And what I'm seeing is that the ability to think, who needs to be connected? How much do they need to be connected? Because not everybody needs to know everything all the time, right? You need to connect them for some purposes and not for others. When do you need that small group at the center, without which no organization works? But when do you equally need that very broad set of connections? Where you need the ideas and the information and the innovation coming in. And again, I often quote you all in talking about shared consciousness and empowered execution. But I find that, say, with New America, what is really critical right now is for everybody to have enough common knowledge to be able then to go off and do their work. But I'd say similarly in groups that I'm working with mayors, with CEOs, with government officials, we can't all be talking all the time, but we have to be thinking about what's the right set of connections for specific purposes.
Absolutely. Let me pull on that a little bit, because everybody's going to return a call or an email or a chat from Anne-Marie Slaughter. But if you take yourself back some years, and as a young person just entering the workforce, and you're trying to get into a network or build one for something, what do you tell someone at that point in life?
Well, I often give them the same advice that I give them when they say, I want, if they come and they say, I want you to be my mentor. Which actually, interestingly, a lot of women have been advised to find mentors, and there are many more women wanting mentors than there are more senior women to be mentors. But I always say, look, you don't start by asking, you start by doing. So if you want me to be your mentor, the people I have the closest relationship with started by coming and saying, how can I help you? And then really delivering. So if I said I need a research memo, boy, was that a great product, and it was turned around quickly. And that if you do, you start to build trust, and that grows, and then you do develop then a mentoring relationship. But I feel like I'm giving you something back for what you gave me. And I think similarly for networks, it's really about delivering. And so what I would tell anybody, rather than wanting to be in the network, wanting to be the member, you want to think about, what can I and whomever I'm connected to actually produce? How can I deliver? You will then become a node in a larger network, or you may be the network that other people want to join. But again, it's people mistake connection for action, and connection is simply the sort of antecedent to effective action if you're connected the right way.
Can I just ask your personal reflection? Because I think so many leaders are now having to figure this out. They're going to have to go down this road, whether they like it or not. When you took the seat at New America as the running that team, you immediately pivoted and said, we're going to become a network, if I remember correctly. What were some of the challenges you faced? Stan McChrystal obviously put us through the same thing inside the special operations community. So I remember that personally, some of the challenges. What was there a shift in mentality and the way the work was done, et cetera, that others might learn from?
So I will say that I wanted to make us much more of a network, but I've had to come to recognize that we actually needed to be both. So we're a funny hybrid. You know, we were originally kind of a collection of programs that had some connective tissue, not that much, but within each program, was some hierarchy. You know, there's director, a deputy director, program associates, and others. And some of those units worked really, really well, and some worked less well, as often happens. But there wasn't an overall connective tissue. And to simply say we're gonna keep working this way, but we're going to become much more networked. And we built a national network. We have people in different places across the country. We had more distributed folks. What I found is it, yeah, I had to work much more closely with the groups, the hierarchies, the subparts of my organization, again, to build more trust, and also critically to know whom to connect to folks who are further out, to know how to connect across the programs. So I would say that we are a network in places. In some parts, we really do operate that way. In other parts, we're more like a set of modules who are connected, or maybe teams. It's just a good way to think about that. But not all of those teams would say we're a network. They would think of themselves as kind of a group who are working together in much more traditional ways. And then the point has been to get them to see how much value they get from greater connection to other teams and then to other hubs that are parts of New America. So I'd say we're a hybrid, and probably for the kind of work we do, that's probably the right way to go.
Yeah, it's a great point. I'm going to ask maybe Stan to dive into that a little bit because, um, interestingly, we'll also describe the special operations community as a hybrid structure. So, Stan, can you build on that experience of knowing what needed to stay more structured and what could be more agile and interconnected, both your time in the service and obviously other executives that you've been speaking with recently?
Absolutely. And our experience was, if you wanted to try to reorganize a military organization, the bureaucracy is just crushing. And so if you say that's how I'm going to change it, you really never get the cultural change because you can't get through the structural change, or it takes so long that the energy's gone. So what we did was we left the basic structure because it was really good for a lot of things. It was good for all the daily routine of life, HR, finance, logistics. Just let it do what it does well, but change how people interact otherwise. And so it also overcame some of the resistance to change, because the argument was, don't worry, it's just provisional. We're just going to do it this way. And people were frightened by it, said, well, then it can't be too bad if it's just provisional. And pretty soon as information flowed differently, relationships changed, culture changed, effectiveness of the organization changed without the drama of restructuring.
That's interesting. It also recognizes that some people really need hierarchy and structure much more than others. And I'm somebody who doesn't. I'm somebody who's fundamentally horizontal in the way I engage the world, and I like a change, and I really resist too much structure. But I've had to understand, of course, there are people who find it very unsettling and really disturbing to not know what those routines are going to be, to not know who's above them and who's below them, and what things are going to be. So you also do have to acknowledge the different personalities in any organization, and some are more networked and some are definitely more routinized.
Can I follow with kind of a personal question? Because one of the things that I struggled in the military with, and I've struggled in retirement with, is prioritization. There are a lot more groups and people that would like me to do something with or for them, and there are more things I would like to do something with and for than I can do to quality. And and I know yours probably that times 3. How do you personally prioritize, assuming they're all basically good? How do you prioritize where you put your energy and then still save some energy for bird watching and all the things, family, that are necessary?
Well, I've got to say, I'm thinking about the various leadership coaches I've had over the years, or time coaches, or others who would just howl with laughter to hear me preach about prioritization. I would say it's a constant struggle. And indeed, every weekend I think, okay, I've got to sit down and map out my priorities for the week. And I do it some of the time. I don't other times. I hate it because it's forcing me to make choices, and I don't want to make choices. I want to be able to do it all. But what happens if you don't prioritize uh, deliberately? You're going to prioritize de facto, and then you often, let important things drop. So what I think of is sort of big baskets of stuff. I've got a writing basket. I'm always writing something, a book, an article, multiple things at once, but there's that writing basket. And actually one of my assistants keeps my writing list, and she is constantly reminding me of what's coming up, so that stays there. Then there's the New America, CEO basket, and so what has to be done organizationally. And then there's sort of all those other things. So I try to keep our priorities in those three baskets and think about, okay, here's what I've got to do this week on the writing front. Here are the things that have to be done at New America if I'm going to be moving things forward. And then the third basket is harder, but I would say I look to where increasingly as I get older, what are the things that I do that other people don't do? And in my own sort of view, I have three abilities. I can connect people, I can create, I'm really quite creative, and I can catalyze action. And I'm better at those three things than I am at many, many other things. And so that's my comparative advantage. So I try to look for those things where I say, I can do something and it'll make a difference there that probably I'm better at than other people. Whereas there are countless people who can run a tighter shop, or who can, move the ball along in ways that I'm probably less good at.
That's great.
But it's
Do
hard.
you try to coach and mentor others towards that, towards their comparative strengths? Because it takes a lifetime to understand that about yourself, right?
It does. It does. I always say that one of the best pieces of advice I got as a leader was from John Sexton, who was the dean of NYU Law School, and a transformative dean. I mean, he took that law school from top 20 to top 4. I mean, it was extraordinary to watch him. And he told me when I became dean of the Woodrow Wilson School, he said, figure out what you're not good at and assume it won't change. Because many of us know what we're not good at, but it's like, tomorrow I'm not going to eat dessert. Tomorrow I've eaten dessert for the past, umpty times, but tomorrow it's going to be different. And his point was, assume it's not going to change and get other people to do it. And I think that's really hard, but I think it's as essential as knowing what you are good at or figuring it out, and it changes over time, is really being honest. Like, this is not my great strength, and then assume I need others to do that. And then you have a team. My president she's a wonderful manager, and for every ounce of vision I bring, she brings execution, and she's not just a detail person, but we're a perfect complement, and we work better that way.
Mm. Do you try to stick to a routine when you laid out your major buckets? Do you know I have to do my writing by 9 a.m. After that, I have to focus on other things, or do you flow openly during the day?
So I definitely write mostly in the morning, but that's a function of age. I look at my sons who are 21 and 23, and I remember when I would start a paper at 2 a.m. too. But now basically any time after 4 o'clock, my brain's not in writing mode unless I'm really up against a deadline. So I write in the morning. After that, it's much more mixed. I am not a creature of routine. There are things that I do every day, like every morning I spend my first 20 to 30 minutes reading some classic. I've been working on the Bible, and believe it or not, I'm now at Revelation after 2.5 years, and it seems incredibly appropriate right now. But I read a classic text, and it's like a meditation with my coffee for the first half hour. So the things like that I'll do, and I definitely have chunks of the day. So right now I will keep my morning free till 11 if I possibly can, 12 on a good day. And then the afternoon is more for management, kind of the kind of other person interaction that we need. But I'm not a creature of, from 8 to 10 every morning I do this, and from that I can't do.
Stan's more of a creature of habit. That would drive him crazy.
Well,
Can,
you have to
can
understand what you're good at.
That's right. That's right. Can we talk a little bit about your observations on this moment? I mean, you've done well known for your work about in the workspace, what trends, where it's heading, what has and has not worked in a generational view. Where do you think what's going to come out of this? What lessons are we learning now? Are there new opportunities that this remote work status is going to create in the workspace? Any trends you would forecast out of this window that we're in right now?
The single best thing that will come out of this crisis, and there are many terrible things as a result, but there are good things, and the single best one is that for women and men who've been arguing that to balance family obligations with work, we need far more flexible work arrangements, and we need to be able to let people work from home as they need to, which many of us have been saying for 10, 15 years and demonstrating, only to meet the wall of, if you're not in the office, you're not working. That's no longer the case. And you're suddenly, of course, seeing people like the CEO of Barclays saying, I'm not even sure we need, a central headquarters. I wouldn't go that far. I still really do believe there's great value in people coming together. I think an entirely work from home world is not one that I would embrace, but I think it's going to be impossible to say to somebody who says, I need to work from home today because my child is ill, or I need to be able to go into the doctor and then I'll take the rest from home. Obviously, you can get your work done. And indeed, people are also discovering that you can be more productive, at least with a day or two more flexibly. Again, nobody wants to do that while homeschooling their children. I don't think that was part of the bargain, but this is really important in terms of showing everyone that they can have a more flexible schedule. And that will really relieve a lot of the pressure on people who can get their work done. They just can't get it done in precisely the boxes and at precisely the places that their bosses might want.
Have you been surprised by the productivity uptick, how quickly that happened?
No, because I have, again, you're not commuting there, and there's so much of being at home allows you, again, if you know that you write better in the morning, then write better in the morning. And many people at New America were already doing this. I think I've actually been more surprised the other way, that the overall envelope of the crisis, I think of it as it's pressing down on all of us, just keeping the news at bay, and the fear and the uncertainty and the empathy and grieving for others, if not for your immediate circle. That weighs on productivity. It really, part of your brain is working very hard to create a clear space to operate. So I've spent much more time with folks at New America saying, hey, don't expect to be able to do even as much as you were doing. It's more productive in some ways, but you've got all sorts of other pressures on you that some you're aware of, again, for people with kids at home, some you're not, but we need to give each other a break here as well. And I feel that way for our organization, but also I think for the country as a whole. I think this is a deep trauma.
If you were going to give advice to American leaders at every level on how to spend the next year, assuming that it will not go back to status quo ante, it will be different, what would you tell them to think about? What would you tell them to concentrate? What would be their goals for like the next 12 months that might not be obvious?
Yeah. So I'd start with thinking about in your organization, and I actually said this to everybody at New America last week. I said, there's a lot about this we don't like. We want to go out. We want a return to normalcy. But spend time thinking about, what is it about this you do like? What is it about this that actually you would like to carry forward as we sort of reopen? Because of course it's going to be a dial, and I don't see us going back to where we were ever in the way we work in various ways. So I'd really think it's important for people to start thinking. For instance, I'll give you a concrete example. We're all going to be using real estate differently. So start to think, well, okay, if I can put many more people in the space that I am contractually obligated to pay rent on, what people would I like to bring in? What other organizations could share my space that would be valuable for me? If I want to be more distributed nationally, as I do, some of my folks are going to move back probably to their hometowns, certainly rather than spending the summer locked down in DC heat. That may mean that I've got connections in places that I didn't have before. And as a place that is called New America that wants to work nationally, aren't those advantages? So very specifically, I would be telling people to be not only noting themselves, but getting their organization to see this as a catalyst for positive change. And then I think nationally, and probably I'd tell people in my organization too, but my own view is this is a moment where we have to focus on the positive. Again, there's so much negative, and it's everywhere. And this is not to only be optimists and see all the silver linings. No, there's a tremendous amount of loss in so many different ways. And even the small thing of thinking about all the kids who are graduating college or high school this year who don't get the celebration that is a milestone in their lives. I mean, that's not, like losing a relative or somebody to the disease, but it is a true loss, and not being able to celebrate and to mourn. But for me, I've stopped retweeting anything negative. Right. I mean, I have views, and there's lots of things to criticize, and politically, many of us feel very, very strongly. But I think as American leaders, I think we want to think about, how do we move this country forward, and how do we focus on what unites us more than what divides us? And there are plenty of things to see if that's your frame. There are plenty of people whose job it is to hold the government to account, and God bless them, and to hold many governments to account. But I think as leaders without portfolio, as people who think of ourselves as leaders in many different contexts, I think it is critical that we really think about how we pull together, and then how we can take the parts that we can touch and push that forward.
Yeah, wow, that's a great point. Stan, I can you build on that concept a little bit, having been through and seen organizational change for many years? What do you think on the backside of this? What are some positives that tend to come out of things like this?
Yeah, I think one thing we stopped thinking certain things are impossible because we've suddenly done different. And I think that opens us even more. You start to say, well, we did this different and it worked out okay. There are a lot of other things we may not have tried, but why not give them a shot? And I think it empowers certain people in the organization who get thrown into a position that they weren't quite sure they'd be in. I know in our organization, Chris and I have seen some young people just rise up to be amazing. The key thing is, how do we now make sure that everybody gets a shot at something different? Yeah. That causes them to grow. And then relationships with other organizations as well. As you talked about networking and we implied about people, but we network organizations too. Yeah. We build that sinew. And how do we, maybe unlikely relationships we didn't have before, in a time of stress or crisis, certain small businesses find they've got a relationship that they didn't have. I think some states and cities are starting to find they've got a common DNA that they need to connect, and they need to support each other, where in less tumultuous times may not be obvious. And then if we all come out of this going, that was hard, but it was good, and we are proud as individuals of what we individually did, then I think this thing comes out as something, we can look back with mixed but positive feelings.
Yes. Yes, and that point about those relationships that suddenly get formed, and I can see them here in Princeton, where suddenly, people are working together who weren't, they were competing, but now they have to. If we think about that as building structures of resilience, because this will not be the last disaster, whether it's another health crisis or a climate related crisis or just the normal sort of vicissitudes of life. If we think about what are those relationships and how do we guarantee they don't just fall away, but they stay there and can be reactivated. They may not be as intense as they are right now, but that's very important, to map those new relationships and see them then as a resilient infrastructure that we can actually invest in.
Absolutely.
Anne-Marie, just one final question in this vein, in your area of expertise as well, in the international relations space. Any view on things that will come out of there, wake-up calls about there are global issues. We have to have international resilient systems as well. Some of those conversations are bubbling up, and I would hope maybe on the backside of this, it's because there will be the next thing, not just a disease, pandemic, et cetera. Any thoughts there?
Yes, and that is such an important question. I've actually been writing a paper on expanding the liberal order. And, there are people who think the liberal order, by which they mean many different things, but let's try with the post-war order that the US led in many ways. Many people think that's just over. Many people think it's just a return to great power competition. We should go back to basically 19th century politics. Many others of us think we cannot possibly afford to do that because, as this pandemic exemplifies, we're facing problems at planetary scale. Not for the first time. Terrorism is a problem of planetary scale, health, lots of global crime, cybersecurity, and climate, and all the related insecurities of food and water and migration. We have to create governance capability at global scale that works better than the current system does. I don't have a perfect answer. I believe we need a better mix of government and global actors. And global actors are non-government. They're business and civic groups and university leaders, all sorts of different kinds, but they're also subnational. They're governors and mayors. So I think we need to build a networked order, which we have in pieces, but it's not well synced up, that uses various international organizations as kind of anchor hubs, but it doesn't leave it to them. So if you think about the World Health Organization, it has abilities to do things that nothing else does, but you need to connect that up to the innovators, the scientists, the tech folks, the researchers, the people who, and then the mayors and others who are going to change people's behavior on the ground. And that, I think, is not something, we're not going to have a magic San Francisco conference that's going to create a United Nations and go forward with an international system. It's going to be a much more complex system. It's going to evolve and emerge. But I think if leaders at least have a vision of what that could be and how it could be more effective. And again, when I think about how you all morphed the special operations to fight Al-Qaeda and how that evolved, we've got to have that vision for the international system as a whole. It's frighteningly complex, but if we don't, there's no magic government that is going to emerge. And I don't believe that the world can be run by China and the United States and a few other great powers. So we gotta be somewhere in between.
Well, and hopefully this will serve to drive that conversation. Anne-Marie, we can't thank you enough for the discussion. Great insights, and truly hope you and your family are all well, as your team at New America. Thank you.
My pleasure, and the same to you. It's always a pleasure.
Thanks, Anne-Marie.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us for that discussion here on No Turning Back. Awesome leader, awesome person to hear from. couldn't think of a better person to have a discussion with about what this all means to us and where our head should be as leaders in such a complex moment. Thanks, and we look forward to seeing you next time.